Hello and welcome back to another episode of PG's Minecraft Command Tutorial. So in the last few episodes we've talked a little bit about interacting with entities and interacting with the world using a few of these commands. Um, Now it's time to talk a little bit about information and how to figure out this information, and then how to store that information as well. So the main command that we're going to use to do this is the scoreboard command. It's our main way of figuring out and storing information in the Minecraft world. So the scoreboard itself, command itself can be a little bit nuanced to figure out, and we're going to talk a little bit about that probably in another video. But for now, and today, we're just probably going to talk about a lot of the specific syntax within the command itself. So with that, let's get started. So today we're going to talk about the scoreboard command. So the scoreboard command has a lot of arguments. First of all, got to type in the actual scoreboard command itself. And then you see our first argument is going to be between players and objectives. So objectives are going to be what the world actually keeps track of. The world doesn't keep track of everything in a way that you can use until you actually define it to be such. In that sense, you can kind of think about objectives as the sort of variables of Minecraft coding, Minecraft programming, because it's going to be how we actually keep track of a lot of things. And then players, you can kind of think about as the objects if we're going to be using a similar analogy. It's a little bit different than that. And we'll talk especially about players, a lot more of the specifics about what can actually be a player, because it's called players, but that's sort of a misnomer. It's not really just players. It's going to be just any entity, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to it. For now, let's stick with objectives. So objectives, type objectives, and you see it brings up a list of 5 options: add, list, modify, remove, and set display. So, of course, the first thing you have to do is actually add one so that we know the world actually knows what you're keeping track of. So we're going to add one. And now this first criteria, or this first argument right here, objective, is the objective name, essentially. It's going to be what you call the objective, what the world and you call the objective. So let's call it, you generally want it to be something close to what you're keeping track of, something that makes sense. You don't want it to just be a random word. You always, when you're naming a variable, you can name it whatever you want, but especially when you're like working with other people, or if you're gonna, make a project and then come back to it, it's probably not the best idea to just have it be some random word that you found. You probably want it to be something that actually makes sense, so that you can be like, okay, I know exactly what this variable or this objective is keeping track of. So for now, let's name it Sandstone Mind. Yeah, then we'll name it Sandstone Mind. Perfect. And then you'll see right here we have the criteria option, and it brings up a list of them. So there's a lot of criteria that we can keep track of. There's a few very specific ones. These are going to be very useful. And then there's like a lot of the different more general ones. So we can talk about the different groupings. So we have broken. We'll do, if I type in Minecraft, we do broken. You can see all of the different blocks and things that can, and items that could be possibly broken. And so if you broke one, this will increment up. We have used. So if you use any of these things, this score, if I had this, will increment up. Let's see. Used. See, mined, of course. I said it's going to be Sandstone Mined, so I'm actually going to do mined and then type in Minecraft Sandstone here. But let's take a look at a few of the other ones first. So we have mined, we have mined, then we have crafted. So this will have any of the items that you can craft. You can keep track of that. There's a few other groups and stuff. I'm probably just going to link the wiki page to this so that you can actually read through a lot of them yourself as well, because it can be very useful to know. And there's a few other very specific scores that I think can also just be very useful, especially like when you're programming a game and stuff. So let's take a look at these more specific ones. We have air. That's an entity's air score. So if they're underwater, then of course the air score will go down. Armor. If an entity puts on armor somehow, then its armor score is going to go up. Death count. That's how many times the entity has died. Dummy. This is one of the most useful scores because it's not tied to anything in the world specifically. It's more just keeping track of numbers, so you can make a dummy score and then modify it and use it in a lot of very useful ways. So dummy is definitely one of the most important scores. You have food, which if I was in survival, you'd see like my food score, and if that goes up or down based on if I eat or whatever, you can keep track of food score. Health. I actually have a health command set up right now, or the health objective set up right now. You see when once I've made this command, I'll hit tab for you so you can see how much health I have. Even though I'm not in survival, it still keeps track of my health score. And then you also have like level, which is going to be like my EXP level, and that's going to be the specific integer value. So right now I think it's actually at 0. I'll hop into survival in a second and actually check it out for you, but I just mentioned that it's the actual integer value because it doesn't keep track of the actual EXP, it keeps track of the level. The other one, you saw me type in EXP, that's a mistake, it should be XP, is the actual XP score. So if I wanted the actual XP value versus just level, then I would type in XP here. So for now, of course, I want Minecraft mined, and Minecraft stone. So now, if I just leave it like this, it will keep track of the fact that I want to mine sandstone. And every time I mine a sandstone, it will increment up by 1. So there's another optional argument, which is here, and that's the display name. If I want this to show as something else, well then I can use some JSON text, which we'll talk about JSON text later. Just know that you can do it for now, but I can name it using some JSON text and be like sandstone. And then if, same way I made it bold earlier, I can also make it bold here. So if I do that, then I have sandstone. And so just to show you, I've got my health score already set up right here. Got my hearts, and then you can see that matches up if I go game mode survival. And you see I have 6 hearts here. If I hit tab, I also have 6 hearts. So yeah, you can see I have my health score already set up. That's essentially how it keeps track of it. If I take damage, so if I do /TP and I TP on myself like 5 blocks in the air, and I'm going to take some damage from that. See, I lose a heart. It also loses it up there at the top. So a lot of those specific commands I showed you, like the health and stuff, keep in mind that those are read-only. So you're not going to be able to modify them, you're only going to be able to read them. Health is one of those, food is one of those, armor is one of those. Again, you'll be able to see a lot of the specific ones and like whether or not they're read-only on the wiki page I link. But for now, just know that like read-only is only going to, you're not going to be able to actually modify those scores for people. You can only read them. That doesn't mean they're not useful. As you can see, like knowing other people's health. If you've ever played UHC, this is a very common one that people set up so that you can see how many hearts everybody has and keep track of that. And if you're working on a map and you decide that you want a player to be set to a certain amount of health, a certain amount of hunger in a certain area so that they can still run, but they won't be able to heal as much without bringing a ton of food to be able to eat or whatever. You can't actually set the hunger, but what you can do is give the player hunger if they're above a certain hunger score. the hunger effect if they're above a certain hunger score, that sort of thing. So even if there are only read only and you can't actually change them, then you can they are still useful. So the next argument, if I open up back objectives, we have list here. So list will just tell me all of the objectives currently set up in the world. See, it tells me that in chat. So I have health set up, which is health, and I have sandstone set up, which, again, that's what I set the display name to. You see, if I actually mouse over it, it tells me the actual name of the command as sandstone mined. So those are the two I have set up right now. Yeah, you can see like the actual names if you mouse over them. So then the next one, we're gonna look at objectives. You can always I'm gonna come back to modify. Let's talk about remove. So remove, you can just remove them from it. So if I wanted to remove either of these, it will just stop keeping track of them in a readable way. So I would just take off health, and it wouldn't show my health anymore. It wouldn't show how much sandstone I've mined. But you'll notice that I don't actually have the sandstone mine being shown anywhere. In tab, it shows my health. But I don't have like any way to actually see my score anywhere. Well, that's what the set display command is for. So if I do scoreboard objectives and I do the set display argument, you see it brings up three options here. So below name, list, and sidebar. So there's also these specific sidebars. So these specific sidebars are just going to be essentially if you're on one of the teams that have these color, then you can also you will specifically be able to show scores to them. But essentially, it's going to be the same as this, which is just sidebar. So I'll show you sidebar first. So we'll do mind. Ooh, and you see nothing changed. Well, that's because I haven't actually updated the score. You see if I do. Oh, I'm in. Well, let me just give myself a PG5. Let me give myself a pickaxe. So if I give myself a pickaxe and I mine one, you see now I have a sandstone. So just like I said, it actually incremented up by one as soon as I actually mined it. So like, you see every time I mine one, my score goes up. So place these back. When I place them back, it doesn't go down because it's only incrementing as soon as it mines up. If I had used, then it would keep track of it differently rather than actually just keeping track of how many I mined. It would keep track of how many I've placed, that sort of thing. If you want this to go down, there's other ways to reset this, but it will only go up if I mine sandstone. So like if I mine this iron block, it doesn't go up. It only goes up if I mine specifically sandstone. So that shows it on that's what the sidebar looks like. That's what this is. Over here is the sidebar. So in the other place you saw listed, scoreboard, objectives, set display, is list. So this doesn't list it off. It shows it when you bring up the list. So what is the list? Well, the list is the tab list. Oops, I forgot to actually set it. So if you just type in one of these slots without an objective here, this is technically an argument that you don't need. If you leave it blank, though, it clears it. So you see it just clears any objectives in that slot. So if I do put in an objective there this time, you see when I hit tab, it shows the exact same score as there. They're both the same because they are the same score, right? It's both my sandstone mined. So, and then finally the last one, I can't show you super well because I'm not on a server, but the other one is below name. So imagine if I hit F5, if I had my nameplate at about that spot right there, right above my head, maybe think about it like right there, then my score would go like right here, if that makes sense. That's where the below name is. It kind of only matters on servers. Yeah, so you have your below name, your list, and your sidebar. So again, like I mentioned, your sidebar, if you have a team, like I have my blue set up here. So let's clear my scoreboard objectives. Yep, let's set display, and let's specifically clear my sidebar. See, it's cleared now. Let's do, yeah, so if I type in team dot black, you see I'm on the blue team, and we'll talk about how to set teams and stuff later, but if I type that in, and I do sandstone mined, well, it doesn't show up for me. But if I type in blue, oops, I have to type in one to actually do it, you see it shows it to me because I am on the blue team. So then now that we've seen how to set display, we can talk about the modify command. So we have the scoreboard, and we'll do objectives. Let's bring this back up, and we'll put it in the list here so that we can, actually, we'll put it in both spots for now. So we'll do sandstone mined, and we'll put it in the sidebar. Oops. Sandstone mined. You see, so now we have sandstone mined in both places. So if I bring up scoreboard, modify, we'll do sandstone mine first. So what we can do here is we can change the display name or the render type. So the display name works exactly the same as when we just created the command. So yeah, I misnamed it. It's like, I don't want it to be called sandstone. I want it to be named text. I want it to be called mined sandstone. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I don't know why I didn't name it that from the beginning. You see, it changes it to mined sandstone, so maybe it's a little bit more specific now. So you can just use that to change the display name if you misnamed it or whatever, just to show it a little bit better. So then the other thing you can do is change the render type. So the render type is interesting because you can change it from showing as hearts or integers. So for now, obviously, if I show you in my tab list and I show you on my on the right of my screen, they're both in integer form, right? They're both numbers. So let's change that to hearts and see what changes. Well, that's interesting. So you'll see that my sidebar actually didn't change. My sidebar actually stayed as an integer. So the sidebar actually always has to render as an integer. The score is always going to be an integer. But when you hit change to list, that's actually what you're changing the render type as. And this also applies to below name as well. Below name also changes along with list. So list will display things in hearts. And this is interesting because you'll notice this isn't my health if I type in game mode survival. You see, I actually have 5 hearts, but there I have 4 hearts in the tab list. So it's not actually showing how many hearts I have. It's just showing this mined sandstone score in terms of hearts, because of course, Minecraft, each half a heart is 1. So then 1, 2, 3, 4 hearts, multiply that times 2 because it's 2 half hearts each. That's actually going to be 8, which is this score right over here. A few interesting specifics about the hearts, though, is if this score goes above 58, it switches automatically to showing as HP integers, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And 20, of course, is the maximum amount of red hearts you can have. Beyond that, it goes to, or a score of 20, I should say, because it's 10 hearts. So 10 hearts is the most you can have, and then beyond that, it goes to absorption hearts. And I'll show you once we actually start modifying the commands what that looks like. So now you should be able to use objectives and sort of think about them like variables, which some of them have specific behavior, like that increment with specific things like this mined sandstone, or just to store information like dummy. You have to actually provide the information if you're going to do that, which we'll talk about how to actually provide it in just a second. But yeah, you can think about objectives a lot like variables in that respect. And we'll talk a little bit more about how some good ways to use them in another video, but that's how the scoreboard command looks. That's its first the first part of its syntax, is how to actually add the objective that you want to keep track of to the world. So now that we've talked about the objectives and how we're using that to keep track of or figure out the information, let's look at what we're actually going to do that with a specific entity. So you'll notice that I didn't have to do anything, and as soon as I made the objective, it kept track of my sandstone score. So let's take a look at how we can manipulate that score, or just look at it a bit. So we'll do /scoreboard. We'll go to players. So players is the next thing, and that's going to be the entity that actually has the objective. And then how do we want to change it? So you see, we have a lot more options here. We have add, enable, get, list, operation, remove, reset, and set. So add, this is not the same thing as the previous add. You don't have to add a player for the scoreboard to keep track of. Add is specifically if you want to add some sort of number to the score. So we'll type in that, and then you'll see we have target selector. Who do we actually want to do this to? I'll just do PG805 for now. So we'll do sandstone mined, and we have a score of, let's add 10 to that score, because why not? And you see my score on the right, and when I hit tab, it's both 18 for now. So add can only add, so like if I type in negative, it won't accept it. And if I, so yeah, it will only add, and it will add by whatever amount you put here. So if I just want to add 1, it will add 1. If I want to add 200, it will add 200. There is a max that you can add, and that is 2, 1, 4, 7, 4, 8, 3, 6, 4, 7. That's the most that you can add, and you see it actually wrapped around. So if I do it again, it's positive 16. So it keeps, once it gets to a certain spot, it starts to wrap around even. Because that's just how Minecraft stores information. This is the actual max value. See, like if I do 8, that's too many. You have to keep it at 7. And similarly, it can't be like it. Can't be a float value. Can't be a floating point number. It has to be an integer. So any integer from 0 can't be -1. You see, from 0 to that number I typed in earlier. That's really big. Number right here. That's the maximum value. And similarly, when we get to subtracting, that's also going to be the max that we can subtract. So yes, add is how we add to a score. Well, remove is going to be the counterpart. That's essentially how we're going to subtract. So you see, if I do sandstone mined and I do 20, 20, you see the scores can be negative, but you have to actually use the remove command to do that, because it's only going to increment up if I actually just mine. But while I'm manipulating stuff, it can be negative. So, but you have to use the remove command. So the add command, like if I remove a negative number, you'd think it'd add, but it won't let you. It won't let you use a negative number. This has to be a positive integer, again, from 1 to this number. This really big number, as Minecraft's maximum thing that it can keep track of. So let's add that 20 back. Oops. 9 and 20. So remember I said health was read only. I already have that set up. So if I do health and I do 20, well, I can't actually add or subtract from health because health is read only. It's keeping track of a score already, and it can't it can't actually like change that because it's read only. So the next thing, if I take scoreboard players, enable. So enable, if I enable myself, you see none of my previous objectives come up. That's because enable is going to work with the trigger command, which we're going to talk about the trigger command in another video, so I'm not going to talk about that too much right now. But enable is how we're going to make a criteria for that. The next one is list. So similar to how list works in the objectives argument, it works similar to that except for players. So you have to actually specify a target selector, and you see it actually lists it, and then it also tells me what the score actually is for me. If there was another entity, it doesn't have to be a player, which again we'll talk about in just a second. You can also just um, specify the entity, and then it will tell you if it has scores. It will keep track of those scores and tell you that when you type in list. So the next argument we're going to talk about, players, is the operation command. This is probably the most complicated of the arguments, because it's going to require two scores. So we have to tell it what score for the first one, which means we have to tell it whose score. So first you have to do a target selector, and we'll do sandstone mind. And you see this is the list of operations that we can do. So we have modular math, which if you know anything about modular math, it's essentially you divide and then you take the remainder after you're done with the integers. So for example, 10 mod 3, if you do 10 divided by 3, you have 9, you have a remainder of 1, so then 10 mod 3 is going to be 1. It's used, there's a few times where it's useful. It's a good one to keep in mind. Then you have your regular multiplication, regular addition, regular subtraction, and then regular division. It does keep everything as integers, so just keep that in mind. So then after integer division, we have less than, we have assign, we have greater than, and we have swap. So less than, you see, when we do an operation, we have to have the second score here. So we'll do health for now, just to show that. And you can have any entity that you're keeping track of a score for here, and then any score that this entity has here. So like I could totally do sandstone mind if I wanted to do the same score. But for now, I'll do health just to help to show you out, show you how this works. So we have sandstone mind here and health on the right. So what this less than does is it checks to see if this score on the right here is less than this score. It's a little bit backwards, I know. Alligator's always supposed to eat the bigger score, but for some reason they have it so that less than compares this score to this score. It's backwards, so it's checking to see if this score is less than this score. And if this score is less than this score, then it assigns it to this score. So right now I have 5 hearts, which is 10 health, and I have 16 mind sandstone. So if I type in greater than, which checks to see if this if this is greater than this score, it shouldn't work. It should just keep this at 16 because this score is not greater than. Let's check that out. That's true. So then if I switch it to less than, you'll see the score got changed to 10 because 10 is less than 16. So the other things work similarly. So if I do assign, then I could just set it to 10. I could have just set it to 10 anyway with no condition and basically just said, okay, I want sandstone mind to be equal to my health or whatever with the assign one. So it just changes this score to be the same as whatever the score is. Swap actually swaps the scores. This is the only one where they both have to be read-only. So if I type in this, I can't actually use health here. If I had another command, I'd be able to switch their values, and it would actually change this one as well. So this is the only operation that actually changes both of them. The rest of these keep them the same. So like if I do multiplied by Minecraft, or not Minecraft health, PG to 5, and I type in health, I should get 10 times 10 because they are the same. So this will be now 100. Similarly, I can do integer division, and it will divide it by 10. I can add, and you see it adds 10, subtracts 20. It's not actually changing this value. All it's doing is add the 20 back. All it's doing is changing the sandstone one and not changing the health because not because this is read only, but because this is on the right here. It's just taking this value and modifying this value somehow. So then the next thing that we can talk about is reset. So reset is sort of like the remove that we did for for objectives, but instead we can remove specific ones. So let's say I don't want to keep track of sandstone mined. It's going to actually just remove that objective from me until I give myself a pickaxe again. That's what I need to do. And survival. I do that, and it actually like takes it away from me. So keep in mind that that doesn't set the score to 0. What it's doing is actually removing the score from me, and until I actually update it again, that it's something to keep track of, that score is gone. It's not keeping track of that technically in a readable way on my actual player. That's why, like, when you first type in the health, a lot of times you might have to take damage to actually update that you are keeping track of the health and that sort of thing in the tab list. It might not show up as soon as you set the display because it's not actually keeping track of it until that score is actually updated. So then the final thing is scoreboard players set. So then this is how we're going to manipulate it very precisely. So you can set a score to be something. So sandstone mined, I want this to be 435, 436 I mean. So I can set it to 436, and just like that, it's 436. So whatever I want the score to be, I set it to that. 20. 2067. Yep, set it to anything as long as it's within that max we talked about earlier. It can be any of that. So yeah, and it can be negative as well. Negative 80, sure, why not? Yep. So you can set the score to be whatever you want it to be. Set it as 10. Actually, we'll set it as 20 again. Set it to 20 for now. So I talked a little bit about how you can have a player doesn't have to be necessarily a player entity. So you'll notice that when I type in /scoreboard players or we'll do set for now, you see it brings up all the target selectors. So let's say I wanted to give a pig or an armor stand. Armor stands are very useful for keeping track of scores in different ways. So if I wanted to, I could type in an armor stand. But the great thing about scoreboards is you can also keep track using fake players. So I don't even have to type in a real name here. I can type in fake name, and it will keep that. So if I do sandstone mined, and I set the score to 10, and make sure the scoreboard objectives set display sidebar sandstone mined, you'll see fake name has 10 mined sandstone. Now that's never going to increment or decrement, so it's going to act like a dummy because fake name is never going to get on the server and mine any sandstone. But yeah, you can give fake players scores and set them, and then do all the operations with them, and that a lot of ways is going to be a great way to keep track of different values and stuff, and give a different name. So for example, if I wanted a timer saying how many seconds was left, what I could do is have it so that there's a command that decrements a score by 1, and I just give that score to a fake player named timer. And then every time that command is run, it will subtract 1, and it will act like a timer would. So that's a pretty cool way to think about how to use that. So now you've seen the syntax for the scoreboard command, and that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for you. If you get a little bit creative, you can probably go a little bit ahead and start working with these in different ways. You make a dummy that actually acts as a timer, because what you can do is you set the dummy and then you set up the player to work as the timer and essentially decrement every tick. And by doing that, you can keep track of how much time has passed and that sort of thing. we'll talk more about a lot of the ways that you can use the scoreboard command to do special stuff like this in a future video. But for now, you have a good familiarity with the syntax. Um, so maybe play around with that a little bit. See if you can't keep track of a few different scores about different things. I want to thank you for the feedback on the last video, and thank you for watching this one as well. I'll see you in the next video.